They called her fragile. To the soldiers, she was just the canteen lady, the quiet woman who poured coffee, handed out bread, and offered tired men and women a smile before they went back out into the duster and danger. Her name was Maria, and she moved with a gentleness that seemed out of place in a war zone. One evening, as she set down trays of food in the mess tent, Sergeant Walker smirked and said to his squad, loud enough for her to hear, "Careful, boys, don't bump into her. She might break." The men laughed. Maria only lowered her eyes, giving the smallest smile. She had heard it all before, too soft, too fragile, too weak. She didn't argue. She simply kept serving. But war has a cruel way of testing everyone, even those who don't wear uniforms. The attack came without warning. Mortars lit up the night sky, the ground shook, and alarms wailed through the camp. Soldiers scrambled for cover, weapons drawn, as smoke and chaos swallowed the base. Maria had ducked behind a wall, clutching her apron to her chest, heart pounding. And then, as she heard it, shouts, groans. Somewhere beyond the smoke, two men lay wounded in open ground, unable to crawl to safety. Bullets hissed past them like angry hornets. Maria froze. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to wait. She was not a soldier. She wasn't trained for this. But then she thought of the faces she served every day, boys barely older than her own son, men and women carrying burdens heavier than anyone should, and now two of them were calling out for help. She didn't think twice. Maria tore off her apron, sprinted into the open, and dropped to her knees beside the first man. Blood soaked his sleeve. His lips trembled. "Don't move," she whispered. "I've got you." With strength no one thought she had, Maria heaved him over her shoulder. A bullet kicked up dirt inches from her feet, but she ran anyway, stumbling, staggering until she reached the safety of a sandbag wall, where medics pulled him from her arms. Before she could even catch her breath, Maria turned back. The second man was still out there, bleeding, too weak to crawl. Sergeant Walker himself shouted, "Stay down, you'll be killed." But Maria didn't stop. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed. Still, she ran back into live fire. She knelt, wrapped her arms around the soldier's chest, and with a desperate cry, lifted him. The weight was crushing, but she refused to let go. Inch by inch, step by step, she carried him, a bullet snapping past, dirt spraying at her heels, until finally, she stumbled into the arms of waiting soldiers. The man she saved reached up with trembling fingers, gripping hers, whispering just one word, "Thank you." When the gunfire faded and the bass fell into silence, Maria sat on the ground, her clothes stained with blood, her hands shaking. She had no medals, no rank, no weapon, yet that night, she had carried two men out of death's shadow. Sergeant Walker stood before her, his face paled, his voice hoarse. For the first time, he didn't have a smirk. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "You're the strongest one here." Maria only shook her head. I just couldn't let them die." Word of her courage spread through the camp like wildfire. Soldiers who once saw her as fragile now looked at her with awe and something deeper: respect, gratitude, even love. From then on, Maria wasn't just a canteen lady. She was family. Pause. To the soldiers, she was just a canteen lady, the quiet woman who poured coffee, handed out bread, and offered tired men and women a smile before they went back out into the duster and danger. Her name was Maria. She wasn't tall, she wasn't muscular, and she certainly didn't look like someone who belonged in the middle of a war zone. She moved with a kind of softness, like she was made for calm kitchens and warm family tables, not tents surrounded by razor wire. But that was exactly why she was there, to bring a little comfort where comfort didn't exist. One evening, as Maria set down trays of food in the mess tent, Sergeant Walker smirked. He nudged one of his men and said loud enough for everyone, including Maria, to hear, "Careful, boys, don't bump into her. She might break." The man laughed, a cruel, careless kind of laugh. Maria only lowered her eyes and smiled politely. She had heard words like that her entire life, too soft, too fragile, too weak. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply kept serving, because that was who she was. But war has a way of testing people, and on one terrifying night, Maria would prove them all wrong. The attack came without warning. The first mortar shell shook the entire camp. The air filled with fire and dirt. Sirens blared. Voices shouted. Bullets cracked in the distance as shadows moved along the perimeter. Soldiers rushed to grab their weapons, to take positions, to do what they were trained to do. Maria wasn't trained for any of this. She ducked behind a concrete barrier, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. And that's when she heard it. Shouts, groans, cries for help. Through the haze of smoke and dust, she saw two men lying in the open. One clutched his bleeding arm. The other barely moved at all. They were caught in the line of fire, unable to crawl back to safety. For a moment, Maria froze. She was terrified. Her mind screamed at her, "Stay down, you'll be killed." But then another thought rose louder. She saw their faces. Faces she had handed coffee to that morning. Boys who joked at her counter. Men who had thanked her for an extra slice of bread. And now they were dying. Maria didn't think twice. She tore off her apron, took a deep breath, and ran. Bullets hissed past her as she dropped to her knees beside the first man. His face was pale. Blood soaked his sleeve. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "I've got you." She slid her arms under him, heaved him onto her shoulder, and staggered to her feet. He was heavier than she expected, but adrenaline burned through her veins like fire. Step by step, she carried him through the open ground. Dirt exploded at her feet where bullets struck. She stumbled, nearly falling, but she refused to stop. Finally, she reached the cover of a sandbag wall. Hands grabbed the soldier, pulling him from her arms. Medics rushed in. Maria collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. She had saved him, but it wasn't over. Because the second man was still out there. And this time, Sergeant Walker himself shouted from behind cover, his voice harsh, commanding, "Stay down, Maria. You'll get yourself killed." But Maria didn't listen. She pushed herself up, legs trembling, and ran again into the storm of fire. The second soldier lay on his back, eyes half closed, blood soaking his chest. Maria slid her arms under him, lifted with all the strength she had, and screamed with the effort. The weight nearly crushed her, but step by step, staggering, stumbling, refusing to fall as she carried him, 2 bullets toward the air. Her lungs burned, her legs shook like they might snap. But Maria never stopped, until, at last, she stumbled into safety, collapsing with the soldier in her arms. The medics pulled him away, rushing to stop the bleeding. The young man's lips trembled, and he whispered just one word as he held onto her hand, "Thank you." A broken bar. Maria's eyes blurred with tears. Her body shook with exhaustion. But in her heart, she knew she had done what she had to do. When the gunfire finally faded and silence settled over the camp, Maria sat on the ground, covered in dust and blood, her hair tangled, her apron gone. She had no weapon, no uniform, no rank, and yet that night a broken bar she had carried 2 soldiers out of death's shadow. Sergeant Walker walked up to her, his face paled, his voice heavy with shame. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "You're the strongest one here." Maria shook her head. She wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. She simply whispered back, I just couldn't let them die." Word spread quickly. Soldiers who once laughed at her now looked at her with awe, some with tears in their eyes, some with gratitude too heavy for words. From that night on, Maria was no longer just a canteen lady. She was family. And in a place where war tried to strip away every trace of humanity, her act of selflessness lit a fire no darkness could extinguish. She reminded them all of something vital, that true strength isn't always found in weapons, or uniforms, or ranks. Sometimes, it's found in the quiet heart that refuses to let others suffer. Sometimes, it's found in the so-called fragile who turn out to be the strongest of all. And so, in a place where war tried to strip away humanity, her act of selflessness lit a fire no bomb could ever extinguish. She reminded them all of something vital: strength isn't always in the uniform, or the rank, or the weapon. Sometimes, it's in the quiet heart that refuses to let others suffer. And sometimes a broken bar, the so-called fragile, are the ones who carry us all. They called her fragile. To the soldiers, she was nothing more than the canteen lady, the one who poured their coffee, handed them bread, and smiled when they returned dusty, tired, and bruised from patrol. Her name was Maria. She wasn't tall, she wasn't built for war, she looked like she belonged in a kitchen, not on a battlefield. And maybe that's why Sergeant Walker smirked one night, and told his men loud enough for her to hear, "Careful, boys, don't bump into her. She might break." The men laughed. Maria only smiled faintly and kept serving. But war a broken bar has a way of testing everyone, even those who don't wear a uniform. Rising tension, urgency builds, quick pace, 0:45 at 2 o'clock. The attack came without warning. Mortars split the night sky. The ground trembled. Sirens wailed across the base. Soldiers shouted. Boots pounded the dirt. Weapons clattered. Chaos. Maria ducked behind a wall, trembling, clutching her apron to her chest. And then as she heard it, through smoke and gunfire came the voices, groans, shouts for help. Two men, out in the open, one clutching a bloody arm, the other barely moving at all. Bullets tore the dirt around them. They couldn't crawl to safety. Maria's breath caught. She wasn't the soldier. She wasn't trained for this. Her mind screamed, "Stay down," but her heart, a broken bar, whispered louder, "Don't let them die." The first rescue, courage awakens, emotional. 2:00 at 4 o'clock. Maria tore off her apron. She ran. Her legs carried her straight into the open, through dust and fire, dropping to her knees beside the first man. She saw blood soaking his sleeve. His lips trembled as he gasped for air. "Don't move," she whispered, steadying her voice though her hands shook. "I've got you." She slid her arms under him, braced, and lifted. The weight nearly crushed her, but she rose to her feet. Step by step, she staggered toward the sandbag wall. Bullets spat the dirt around her. Her knees buckled. Still, she carried him, until at last a hand reached out, pulling him to safety. She collapsed, chest heaving, lungs burning. She had saved one, but another was still out there. The second rescue, a defiance, gritty tone. 4:00 at 6 o'clock, Sergeant Walker shouted from cover, voice hoarse and desperate, "Maria, stay down, you'll be killed." But Maria didn't listen. She pushed herself back up, legs trembling, vision blurred, and she ran again. The second soldier lay bleeding, eyes half closed, his body limp. Maria fell to her knees beside him. She slipped her arms beneath his shoulders, locked her jaw, and pulled. Every step was agony. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned. A bullet whistled past her ear. Dirt sprayed against her legs, but she didn't stop, inch by inch, step by step, until finally she stumbled into safety once more, collapsing as medics grabbed the soldier. His lips quivered, his voice barely a whisper, "A broken bar, thank you." Maria's tears fell freely now. Her hands shook, but her heart, a broken bar, knew she had done what she must. Climax, the realization, slower, deep tone. 6:00 at 8:30, when silence finally settled over the base, Maria sat on the ground. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dust and blood. She had no rank, no weapon, no training. Yet that night, a broken bar, she carried two men out of death's shadow. Sergeant Walker approached, his face paled, his voice stripped of pride. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "You're the strongest one here." Maria shook her head, wiping her eyes. I just couldn't let them die." And in that moment, a broken bar, the soldiers saw her differently. Not as fragile, not as weak, but as one of them. Resolution, a hopeful tone. 8:30 at 10:30. Word of her courage spread through the camp. The soldiers who once laughed now looked at her with respect, with gratitude, with love. Maria was no longer just a canteen lady. She was family, and in a place where war tried to erase humanity, she became the reminder of what they were fighting to protect: her kindness, her courage, her refusal to let anyone be left behind. Closing message, a uplifting, gentle tone. 10:30 at 12 o'clock. So remember this: a broken bar. Strength isn't always found in uniforms, or ranks, or weapons. Sometimes a broken bar, it's found in the quiet heart that refuses to let others suffer. Sometimes a broken bar, it's found in the ones the world calls fragile, because more often than not, they're the ones carrying us all. A pause 3's. Fade soft. Never mistake kindness for weakness. It is the strongest force of all. Tone, reflective, gentle. 12:00 at 1400 hours. In the days that followed, Maria went back to her work in the canteen. She still poured coffee. She still handed out bread. She still smiled at the soldiers who lined up each morning. But something had changed. The soldiers no longer looked past her. They no longer saw a fragile woman hiding in the background. They saw a protector, a sister, a guardian of life. And every time a soldier raised a cup of steaming coffee from her hands, they remembered that night, the night the woman with no weapon carried two of their brothers back from the edge of death. Tone: emotional. 14:00-15:30. One evening, Sergeant Walker himself walked into the canteen. He didn't joke this time. He didn't smirk. He stood before Maria, hat in his hands, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "You taught me something," he said. "I thought strength was only muscle and firepower, but now a broken bar I know its heart." Maria only smiled, a humble, tired smile. She didn't want glory. She didn't want praise. She only wanted every soldier who came through those doors to know one thing: they weren't alone. Tone: story close out. 15:30 1700 hours. And so, Maria's story became more than a tale of bravery. It was proof that kindness in the darkest places is not weakness. It is the light that keeps people alive. Long after the war, veterans would tell the story of the canteen lady who carried two men under fire. And though the battles faded into history, her act of selflessness lived on in their memories, in their families, in their hearts. Because sometimes, the strongest heroes of broken bar are the ones nobody expects. A.O. Diaris's final closing narration, soft, inspiring. So, if the world ever calls you fragilely broken bar, remember Maria. Remember the night she proved that the softest hands can carry the heaviest burdens. And remember this: kindness is not weakness. Kindness a broken bar is strength.